Hello YouTube, hello everyone, and once again introducing my guests Luke.
Hello.
And you James.
Hello there, this is James S. Crockett, James 1978.
It never gets old. Okay, well once again people, article links in the description. How did the therapists that saw Elliot Rodger not identify the problem? And I'll go in the order that I can see you. So, you, James?
Well, very simply, clinical psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, people in the mental health profession in general, their job isn't to predict the future, as the person who wrote the article went on to explain. They are not mind readers. However, this is the role which, as indicated by this article, far too much of society seems to expect. To quote one paragraph from the article, links down below. Elliot Rodger's story makes me feel despair and hopelessness. Rodger met with trained mental health professionals, the people we rely on to identify dangerously disturbed individuals, and they apparently failed to perceive the depths of his problems. Police officers who spend their days dealing with violent, troubled people described Rodger as polite and courteous. So, because he was... again, if he was angry and aggressive, then the police would have recognised that he was going to murder 6 people. Something that I was talking about during the break, does the mental health profession exist to help people, or does it exist to protect us from dangerous nutters? And although the person who wrote the article went on to ask, can even a trained professional reliably distinguish a troubled person from a dangerous person, it does... The general attitude, the way that people immediately leapt on mental illness as the obvious cause of the Isla Vista shooting, that, well, a man suddenly goes out and murders 6 people, attempts to murder many more, but can't get into the sorority house. Oh, it's another lone nutter with a manifesto. It's another mental illness, when the reality is, as we both know, Alex, people with schizophrenia, for example, are significantly less likely to commit crimes.
That's true of many.
Exactly. Mental illness across the board actually reduces the risk of violence, statistically speaking.
And people with mental illnesses are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators.
Exactly. In many cases, precisely because of this stereotype that they are the quote-unquote dangerous nutters. And the implication in this article, if you read the interview, was, if only that we'd been able to section him sooner, commit him to a mental hospital, lock him away for being mentally ill, whatever term we wish to use. If only we'd been able to do that sooner, then 6 people would be alive. Section him for what? Commit him for what? He was diagnosed with an autistic spectrum disorder, as Luke pointed out during the recording break before we started recording today's episode. He was prescribed with a drug which, yes, its primary purpose is as an antipsychotic, used in the treatment of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, but it's also used to treat irritability in people with autism spectrum disorders. Just as antidepressants are used to treat anxiety disorders. So for the press to splash across the headline, "He refused to take an antipsychotic," factually true, but that makes it the worst possible kind of lie. Lying by implication that he was suffering from a severe mental illness, when in reality, again, Luke quoted from the manifesto, "The psychiatrists, psychologists and therapists gave me the same useless advice." What? To actually go out and talk to people? To just not assume that these quote-unquote blonde sluts are rejecting you because they're not throwing themselves at you, to actually try and have a conversation with a woman. And that was spiteful and bitter, but ultimately it comes down to the old joke about psychiatry. How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb has to want to change. It is blindingly obvious that Rodger was resistant to the entire process of therapy. He had no interest in taking any advice that his therapists gave him. He had no interest in taking any of the medication which he was prescribed. He was, as far as I can tell, he was basically sent there by his parents, who were worried about his erratic behaviour. But that's the thing. A psychiatrist can't diagnose a person who refuses to talk. So maybe, who knows, if he had cooperated, maybe there were other issues. Maybe the mental health profession could have helped him if he had cooperated, if the light bulb had wanted to change. But returning to the wider issue, looking beyond Elliot Rodger himself, again, the misplaced fear and bigotry against mental illness in general, the implication that the mental health profession's duty is to protect society from these, quote, dangerous nutters. In case anyone wants to take me to task in the comment section for using such a term, I am a mental health rights advocate. I am using the term as sarcastically as possible in massive air quotes. But it's such a vast issue. Anyway, yes, Alex.
But yes, I mean, certainly, I mean, one of the things that came to mind for me is that, yes, if you're neuroatypical, which I am and a lot of my friends are, then there is that element of, for example, social isolation, which came up yesterday when Ashley was here. That's one example, but it's sort of like I went all of last week without wishing to sound too facetious, but I went all last week without killing 6 people, and the week before that. Actually, I've been quite successful. I think I've not murdered in something like 33 years. I've not gone on a killing spree in a third of a century.
It's leaving aside the tone, Alex. Some people might have a problem with that, but yes, the point was that Ashley was making yesterday, and I agree with her. Do not please take this in a poor little rich girl or first world problems sense. But the fact that you are isolated, an individual is neuroatypical, isolated, angry, emotionally disturbed, lonely, just looking for love and attention, does not drive people to commit mass murder. Mental illness does not, in the overwhelming majority of cases, drive people to commit mass murder. So, again, this idea that the tendency to commit mass murder is a symptom of mental illness, which psychiatrists can easily identify just by looking at a person, or just by performing one ink blot test. And oh God, we've talked about avoiding the jokes, but I've now got the image in my head of Elliot in the psychiatrist's office doing the ink blot test. What do you see in this image? Blonde sluts bleeding. What do you see in this image? Black men who fucked blonde sluts bleeding. And then they just roll him into the padded cell and lock him in there for life. Sorry, people, that's not how psychiatry or therapy or clinical psychology works.
And Luke, your input.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we have to remember is that psychologists, psychiatrists, and counselors, they're all doing their job, and they all have to make their money by having people that want to go and see them. So this notion that somehow people are being interrogated for their hidden motives, I'm not really sure where that's manifesting from. I assume the people that are making these claims probably haven't themselves been to counselors of any type. That's speculation there. I have actually been in the situation, though, of being forced to go see a counselor when I didn't think that there was anything wrong, and I certainly didn't take the whole ordeal very seriously. However, if I were harboring some desire to hurt another individual, the absolute last thing that I would do is make the counselor aware of that. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it seems like the more determined somebody is, the less that they want to change, and the less that they're reaching out, the better they're going to be at hiding their true intentions.
Exactly. This again, I decided not really to make that point because it seemed so obvious. But meaning no offence to Ashley, who again was talking about this on yesterday's program, on yesterday's podcast. If people should have reached out to Elliot Rodger, well, it's obvious that he was as closed off as a clam with severe insecurity issues, that he just didn't want to talk. He went to therapists for years, a safe place where, okay, he wouldn't have talked about his desire to hurt or kill people, but he could have talked through his issues. And yes, maybe that wouldn't have changed anything if you're one of those people who thinks that therapy, just talking about your problems, doesn't help anything. But the resources were there. His family was concerned about him. Therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists were there reaching out to him. He could have confided in someone. I believe American law states that everything is confidential as long as you are not planning to commit a crime. Again, if Elliot, this would probably have been years before Elliot planned the massacre. But returning to the article itself, though, and the wider issue which it indicates and hints at, if does not state directly, it seems that the people asking such questions, why didn't the therapists, psychiatrists, counsellors, psychologists identify Rodger's homicidal tendencies in time, don't care about helping him or anyone like him, don't care about whether the person reaches out or gets the help he needs, whether the resources, help and support are available. It simply appears to be that they want psychiatrists to lock up these dangerous nutters, again in massive inverted commas, before they harm anyone else. And this was the reason why, if you remember, Alex, in the 1990s, care in the community was crushed.
Oh yes.
It's not that society gave a damn about the mentally ill people who were being left to fend for themselves. It was that society in general didn't want these dangerous nutters living next door to them, or anywhere except locked up in padded rooms. So it's just another example of how the again, bearing in mind the fact that, to the best, as far as anyone can ever know, the fact that considering that he went to multiple psychiatrists, psychologists and therapists, Elliot Rodger was not mentally ill. Bearing that in mind, it does still seem... this case does still demonstrate the massive stigma surrounding mental illness. This would appear to be a much more serious issue that will probably be with us for at least another century.
And Luke, any reply?
I am strongly concerned about any notion that we're not locking up enough people that are going and seeking help from counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists. It seems like it's deeply ingrained in the American culture and reflected in our imprisonment rates that the solution is to lock up anybody who deviates from the norm.
Yes.
What really concerns me is that, like many policies like this, it could have exactly the opposite of the intended effect. Just because counselors didn't stop this massacre from happening doesn't mean that if people have, thoughts about killing people, but they knew that going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist could land them permanently in an institution, it doesn't mean that other massacres couldn't happen as a result of whatever's being proposed here. I guess, it sounds like the person who wrote this article wants psychologists and psychiatrists having people committed routinely.
Oh, yeah.
That's how I interpret it.
Oh yes, it is the Republic of Sandals argument regarding BDSM, and this call to just label anyone as mentally ill or disturbed or whatever term you wish to use, and then to deny their rights. As you say, Luke, that will automatically drive people away from seeking help. But remember, we don't want to help them. We want to stamp out this.
Well, all I know is that alcohol prohibition was one of society's great ideas. I say that in sarcasm, to cut down on crime, and the same thing with drug prohibition, and this notion that somebody in a suit somewhere can identify future criminals and we can lock them up ahead of time just seems like it doesn't work really well.
They're already trying that. 9 out of 10 people in like 9 out of 10 people in American prisons are either African American or Hispanic. They're trying because it just doesn't seem to work.
Well, yeah, and I think that it's going to remain that way until we have a system like was presented in the movie Minority Report, where we can literally see the future. I think that I'm going to continue to have an issue with any kind of preemptively locking people up. If anything, I think we're doing it too much.
Yes.
And
sorry, go ahead, Alex.
You, James, could this be your final thought?
Again, I think I was just going to repeat myself. The purpose of committing, sectioning, whatever term you wish to use, is to treat the people in question who have been diagnosed with a mental illness, not as I berated in one old video on my channel, not locking someone up because a head teacher is angry because she sees fairies, believes in fairies, should I say, not even sees them, that just made it, but believes in fairies. You lock them up for, you deny their freedom for the limited period while you provide treatment without their consent, because they are, in the opinion of two professionals, not capable of giving consent. It is not a system to protect society from, again, quote unquote, dangerous nutters. Seriously, people desperately need to learn and to understand more about the mental health system in their own countries across the world. Mental health in general. The ignorance of the issues involved here, fueled by fear, is a massive issue which reaches far beyond Elliot Rodger.
Okay, and Luke, final thoughts?
I think James said it all.
Okay, so it's goodbye from James.
May the great holy donkey forgive us all, because we know not what we do.
And good night from Luke.
Good night. I've got nothing.
And it's good night from me.